Good evening, everybody, and warmly welcome back to Horizons discussions after a short hiatus. We're very proud to been doing this for the past 10 years as a Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, Serbia-based think tank, a Serbian think tank, essentially, but a think tank that is hoping to help improve the understanding of the world to this region. We have been privileged to host on this stage a number of exceptional speakers over the past 10 years. We've hosted the likes of Jeffrey Sachs and John Mearsheimer, Neil Ferguson, amongst many others. But never, ever so far have we had the experience of having a guest that is so exceptionally well-known and famous in the very, very large group of people. And today, actually yesterday, when we were showing him around Belgrade, we couldn't carry out the tour because we kept running into Chinese tourists who were interrupting our tour. And the dozens of them were insisting on taking pictures with our guest of today. So he is a very well-known political thinker, an intellectual from China. Our guest's name is Professor Zhang Weiwei. He's a distinguished professor at Fudan University and the director of the China Institute in Shanghai. In the mid-80s, Professor Zhang served as English translator for Deng Xiaoping and other Chinese leaders. As a matter of fact, he visited Belgrade back in 1986 as a translator of the Chinese premier, Zhao Jiang. And last night in the Three Hats in the Trishashira restaurant, they opened the book where the Prime Minister of China actually signed a note, which was kindly translated by Professor Zhang last night, just like it was 39 years ago when he was there. He has lectured at a number of international universities, including Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, and Yale. And he had risen to international fame when he famously debated Francis Fukuyama back in 2011 on democracy and the future of the world order. This has remained a fascinating read all until today. He's an author of a number of books on the rise of China, on the China model, on China as a civilizational state, and he is very famous for having made a prediction in 2021, and not many people were making that prediction that Donald Trump was going to become again the president of the United States. It was right in the aftermath of the inauguration of Joe Biden in 2021. So tonight we're going to talk about the world. We're going to talk about the world from the China's perspective. And Professor Zhang is coming to Belgrade at an exceptionally interesting moment in the world's history, when the world is arguably going through a very deep and very sour geopolitical recession. When one mentions recession, when most people think about the economy, about the cycles in economy, but my theory is that the geopolitics is also cyclical, just like the economy, that there are periods of good times followed by the periods of bad times. The only difference is, the most significant difference being actually
that the geopolitical cycles tend to last much longer. They tend to last for decades, as opposed to the economic cycles, which are just a couple of years or 3 to 4 years. Now, the geopolitical recession essentially starts when the actual division of power in the world no longer reflects the existing rules, the established rules of international institutions. When the rules of the road are no longer reflecting the realities of the road. And then the question is, what do you do about it? How do you go out of this situation? There are essentially 3 things that one can do. One is to try and reform the existing institutions. The second thing is to build new institutions or build new models, be they regional or global, because the old ones are no longer fit for purpose. And then the third thing is to take matters into your own hands, to solve things unilaterally, to go to war if necessary. And arguably in 2025 and in the years beyond 2025, all those 3 things at the same time are going to be tried and applied with various degrees of vigor and energy by the international actors. One of the most important international actors, undoubtedly, is China, a country that is in so many ways like no other, and not just size that we are talking about. We're talking about exceptionally long and rich history. A country that, unlike most other countries, has no beginning. Nations have their beginnings. They cherish their beginnings. They have the foundational ruler or the foundational moment of a creation. Well, China doesn't have that. China has been around forever in Chinese view. The famous historical or mythical Yellow Emperor from 5,000 years ago that many in the West mistakenly considered the founder of China. The Yellow Emperor rose to fame for having reunited China. So China has existed before. So China has been around forever. It has no theological myth of creation like most monothetical religions do. China has been the world's largest economy and the most sophisticated society for pretty much the entire human history, with the exception perhaps of the last 150 to 170 years. The last 40 years of China's development have arguably been the most successful experiment in the human history of development, having lifted over 1 billion people out of poverty within 1 or 2 generations. But the headwinds are hard, and the world is in the negative geopolitical cycle. And whatever China does and whatever China thinks is going to be crucial for the future of mankind. So before I ask you to warmly welcome Professor Zhang Weiwei to Belgrade, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Chinese Embassy in Belgrade, as well as to Zijin for supporting the visit of Professor Zhang Weiwei to Belgrade, and I ask you to warmly welcome our special guest of tonight. Professor Zhang, so I'm going to ask you at the very beginning something very theoretical. Later on, we're going to get into more practical affairs. But what makes China civilization state, and why is civilization state different from a nation state, and how that informs, inspires, and drives China's thinking and the building of the China model in modern times?
Okay, thank you first of all for your very kind and warm introduction and for inviting such a great audience in this gorgeous hall. And all this make me feel excited. I'd like to share my views with you and be more than happy to have conversations with you, have dialogue Q&A with the audience here on whatever issues you are interested in. Concerning this idea of civilizational state, it's a concept I have advanced, back in the year 2010. And I've traveled over 100 countries like you while doing my theoretical research. The more I visited outside the world, outside China, I think China is, in whatever way, so unique. So I said it's really not just a nation state, it's a civilization. In other words, I said the civilizational state is amalgam of the world's longest continuous civilization with a super large modern state with 4 unique features. In terms of population, world's largest population, or on par with India, its continent, large territory, and then longest continuous culture, and then very rich history. What's important is, in both these 4 elements, it's a combination of the old and the modern. For instance, in terms of large population, it's not just we have 1.4 billion people. It is this 1.4 billion people is well educated. Every year we produce more engineers, scientists than the Western countries combined. Over 5 million engineers a year. For Huawei or BYD, they want to start a plant. They want to recruit 10,000 engineers within 1 or 2 weeks. It's done. This is something no other country can match, both old and new. Same with territory, vast territory. It's a continent. You fly for 5 hours, still within China. Same music, same food, or differences, but it's Chinese. It's also this vast territory, the historical inheritance. It's also super modern. It's connected with the world's best infrastructure, highway system, bullet train system. Furthermore, digital infrastructure, first rate. I was in Paris. I told my French friends, because they're somehow a bit cocky and arrogant. I said, I really share you a simple truth. Today, if you go to Tibet or Xinjiang, the internet connection and service is better than the center of Paris. Yeah. I will tell you why the Chinese model. And then, same with the long history, whatever. Whatever you see is it's a modernization of, it's combination of old and new, in history as well. For if we talk about Chinese political culture, the Western system is more about election. The Chinese system is about selection. But because we invented a courtesy system, which is more or less about the civil servant examination system. Anyone has to go through exam, whatever family background, and you can go up to the prime minister in China's long history. So that history goes back at least 1,500 years, if not longer. This system has continued to this day. We have modified it. It has evolved and developed into the new system we call the selection plus election. Selection, tradition from our own system, election from the West. We combine the both. So we produce more competent leaders. Yeah. Same with the culture. You just go to, as if you go to China, you will see this splendid, this diversity of food. China is an amalgamation of hundreds of states into one over its long history. So the food is also the amalgamation of hundreds of types of food into one. And just an anecdote, but it's also true. United States fear of the TikTok, so they banned TikTok. So just before this this ban issued, officially they call TikTok refugees. You know, they still want to use TikTok, but it will be banned. So they flocked to Chinese internet. It's called the Red Note, a little red book. And over 1 million Americans, young people, Z generation, netizens, conversation in English and Chinese in Chinese through machine translation, AI translation. They're comparing notes and talking day and night to each other. Unimaginable. They talk about living standards in China and United States. They compare with each other. United States has higher salary. China has lower salary. In nominal terms, the gap is huge. But comparing price and everything, and food and everything, and they came to a conclusion. The big data shows Chinese live a much better life than Americans. So this is another wake-up call to many American middle class. This is something real. For one thing that impressed Americans most is this cultural phenomenon of display of hundreds of foods available. Any canteen you go, any restaurant, even go to a university canteen, it's at least 100 types of food available which you can buy. So this civilization is different.
So thank you very much. I find it paradoxical that TikTok was being banned, or is considered to be banned, based on threats to the national security to the United States, and the possible misuse of the algorithm to advance the goals of Chinese propaganda, and that as a result, quote unquote, or without quotes, Chinese propaganda, and then you end up having millions migrating from TikTok to something that is called the Little Red Book. That is paradoxical, I think. But speaking about the global order and the geopolitical recession, one can argue that the three root causes of this geopolitical recession are that, number one, Russia was not properly integrated into the new global order after the end of the Cold War, that China was integrated into the global order, and third, that the vast goodies and the vast wealth generated out of globalization was not equitably divided in the industrialized democracies, causing political locomotions that ended up with elections of non-mainstream or non-centric political figures throughout the West. But I'll stick to the second point. China was integrated in the global economic order by joining the WTO, by essentially becoming the darling of globalization. It rose remarkably as a result of globalization. It has become a tenet of international organizations, economic, political, and others. And now we're seeing the trend of the withdrawal of the founding father, or at least how they would like to see themselves as the founding father, the United States of America, from the international system. And some steps have been undertaken. Withdrawal from the WHO has already been activated. The withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty has occurred. There is a Human Rights Council withdrawal and perhaps a UNESCO withdrawal. If I'm not mistaken, tomorrow there may be an announcement on the substantial cutting of the budget provided by the United States to the United Nations. So I'm asking you, China, as a huge stakeholder in the global system, and America as another huge stakeholder that seems to be withdrawing, how China sees this? does China see this as an opportunity to fill the void? Or is it going to be unsustainable, the current system without America, so that China wants to build a new system of world governance, something that President Xi Jinping branded as the community of the common destiny for the mankind. So does China want to reform, to keep the current system, to fill the void in the current system, to reform the current system, or to build a new international system? What's your view?
And I had a long discussion with our Russian friends in Moscow last year. And I tried to compare China and Russia and their attitudes towards the international system. And I came to a conclusion. The difference between China and Russia is that Russia is a revolutionary. It wants to overthrow this older system and replace it with a new one, from unipolarity to multipolarity. And China is a reformer. We want to reform the system. And we also met Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. He said, the candidate, he said, we have some admiration for Chinese because you can beat your enemy on its turf. He gave the example of WTO. Yeah. It's the US creation. You joined the WTO. Now the United States wanted to withdraw. In other words, we try to see it in a civilizational state. It has both advantages and disadvantages. And how can we make use of the best part of it and then try to, whatever, control the damage it can possibly create? So concerning your question about international multilateral system or multilateral cooperation, I think here involves two concepts. One is multilateralism, as we know as it is. The other is multipolarity. The world is already multipolar. It's already emerging. Take BRICS, 10 members as an example. Its total GDP is already larger or much larger than G7. So G10, or not G10, BRICS, 10 members, roughly 37% of global GDP. G7, it's 30% by purchasing power parity. So you have to reflect if this multilateralism reflecting this multipolarity. That's what we call genuine multilateralism. If this multilateralism that fails to reflect real multipolarity, then this is a fake or semi-fake multilateralism. So it reminds me of a talk given by Angela Merkel when she was still Chancellor of Germany. At Davos, I was present in the audience. She said, you know, we have to reform IMF, World Bank, because China has no patience. China is not waiting for us. So they are creating BRI and institutions you mentioned.
BRI, the Belt and Road.
Yeah. So we have to hurry up our reforms. But reform never comes. So we just do whatever we should as a way to push its reform. If they not reform, then new ones will replace them. No other way.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. You can either reform,
Yeah.
or you can build new ones,
Yeah.
or if you are a civilization state, you try both. You try to both reform and to build new ones, and then see how that ends. But there's this third avenue, which is take matters into your own hands and do what you must and secure your national interest unilaterally by means of force, military, or by means of, as a matter of fact, slashing tariffs on your partners. So that leads me to the elephant in the room, which is the relationship between the United States and America. The United States of America and China. And we have seen Donald Trump's first opening salvo, which is nothing surprising, because this was actually something that he was saying he would do. Perhaps it was even like a softer version of what most people expected when it comes to tariffs. He announced 10% of tariffs on Chinese goods. Earlier this morning, China announced the official countermeasures, introducing sanctions and introducing tariffs of 10 to 15% and opening a legal procedure into Google. So are we seeing the beginning of the trade war between the number one and the number two, regardless of which way you want to order it, but definitely two most powerful global economies?
Thank you. And you just, at the very beginning, mentioned our prediction about the return of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
That was 2021. And in January, made this prediction openly to the Chinese and international audience. I said the Biden administration, from our point of view, is transitional. The United States will return to this era of Donald Trump, or Donald Trump era without Donald Trump, which means he could be assassinated. And in the end, our prediction turned out to be accurate. So we are a leading think tank in China, and the Chinese government also share our view. So we have got 4-year preparation. We are fully ready, whatever. It's a small case. It's not a big deal, and we're ready for that. So now it's not only tit for tat, but punishing blow is the complete, almost comprehensive ban of rare earths from China, which affects all US production of military equipment, from simplest bomb to missiles to rockets to whatever systems. And of course, Donald Trump said 10% tariff. We said 10 to 15% tariff for US products. And Donald Trump said he will call Xi Jinping within 24 hours. I did not see any reply from China. And Donald Trump said, not in a hurry, we can wait. So the ball is in the US court.
Well, I understand that, and it's logical, because if you've been preparing for this in a while, and you're well known for being very cautious and meticulously planning for the future, I have no doubt that the Chinese government foresaw this, and that Chinese government has a playbook, a very well structured playbook, and how is it gonna drive this turbulence. I have no doubt that China can survive a trade war with the United States, and I also have no doubt that the United States can survive a trade war with China. The question is who's going to suffer more, and we can debate it, but both of you guys are going to survive. Now, when it comes to the rest of the world, including, say, us in Serbia, it's not so sure that we can survive the war between you guys, because markets are very nervous this morning, and I can imagine if there is an escalation of these measures vis-a-vis each other, that the global economy can go into a dive. Now, you're 1.4 billion people and a vast technological superpower, and they are too, plus they can print dollars, and I'm sure that you guys are going to be okay. Now, what are we supposed to do? And are we supposed to be in a position to plead with you to try and find some kind of an agreement? And how likely you think that there could be the deal between the United States and China, brokered by, I don't know, Elon Musk or whoever else? Do you think that the year of the snake is going to end up being, in economic terms, the year of harmony or the year of confrontation come its end.
And indeed, this symbol of Year of Snake is, in its very traditional sense, origin of the meaning of spirit of the snake at that time was it's intelligent and it's resilient. So from the very beginning of this year, we see a sign of intelligent and resilient of the Chinese power, as represented by DeepSeek. It's almost explosive, you know. You just look at the implications, how worried, deeply unsettled, disturbed in the US from Silicon Valley to the stock market, as if everything will be different from January, from this month, from now. Some people say, it's not my comment yet, China is now more or less on the verge of strategic counter-offensive, counter-defensive, whatever you call it, offensive, from defensive to offensive. But this is a way of interpretation, depending on your perspective. But indeed, it's from our analysis, again, this is my own research, we have done this a long time ago, we came to a conclusion, the US economy depends more on China than China on the United States. That's why the United States will lose trade war, will lose tech war, and lose miserably. We said this back in the 2018, and we are the minority in China and in the world and making these predictions. It turned out to be right. And Chinese on the whole very cautious people. Our style is very different from United States. We prefer to display what we call the PPT, yeah? and this is what we are going to have, the latest weapon, gadgets to change the world, whatever. And we deliver, and usually we seldom announce anything before we are very sure that really it's done, it's successful, it will change the world. Then we make short announcement, or if we do not announce it, it's there. So it's a totally different, very different culture, very different strategic culture, and different political culture. But it's also true, as an observer and an analyst of the Chinese model, I think when China has something like DeepSeek, like BYD, like the sixth generation of jets, you know, fighters, which United States don't have. It already means the world is different. And usually when we make something public, it means we have a lot of other things in the pipeline. So more are coming. You are going to see our friends in Serbia, in Europe, in the world, in the global south, we'll see. Yeah. There'll be more and more fascinating news, good news for the global south, for the non-Western world, for our friends. Because we are a socialist country. We believe in socialism, Chinese style, that has worked. And when I was in Russia, I said we have learned so much from the Soviet Union, both positive lessons, negative lessons. We also learned lessons from Yugoslavia. I came in 1987 to Yugoslavia with Chinese premier to study Yugoslav experience. At that time, Belgrade was much more developed than Beijing. We went to supermarket, 5-star hotels, and local restaurants. We think it's more developed. We were thinking one day China will become like this, you know. Then, of course, as friends of Yugoslavia and Serbia, we were saddened by what we saw later. Separation, disintegration, and it's whatever. But we try to draw lessons, what Yugoslavia went wrong. what Soviet Union went wrong. And in the end, we tested, experimented in China. It's a vast country. This part of Chinese model you mentioned, we always do pilot projects on whatever new ideas. China's reform started with experiments in Shenzhen, next to Hong Kong, a whole city, to experiment new things, yeah, etc. And then try to do things. So with this kind of experimental approach, gradually now we are more confident. We have found a way to success, the Chinese way. It has worked. It's not perfect, but so much better than the American way.
Well, I think you'd find a lot of people in this country who would agree with you and who would be perhaps emotionally cheering for China's victory in the trade war with America, despite the fact that we're all going to end up economically dead in our country as a result of this war. Because, you know, America, as the principal rival, has this exceptionally strong tool of global economic and financial governance, which is the US dollar. And it is exceptionally powerful weapon. It's a currency like no other. And once you're at the firing line of this particular weapon, be there sanctions or the cutting out of the international banking systems, then you run into difficulty. You might get away with it and survive it, like Russia seemed to be surviving it, but Russia is vast, and Russia is also a special case. For smaller countries, given that the power of America lies in this domination of the international banking system, for instance, we have our state-owned company, which is subject to American sanctions. They may be delayed, the implementation of these sanctions, but at some point we'll be facing a reality that you won't be able to buy gas at the gas stations because banks wouldn't dare do the transactions. So what do you say to the small partners of China? And Serbia is like a small partner of China that is exceptionally a good friend of China. This is something that I'm very proud to have contributed to in the past. What do you say to the small countries? This is the China model, this is the China technology, feel free to use it, but would you be able to assist those countries if these guys are faced with a choice that if they want to go your way, if they want to embrace your either technology or a worldview, you end up being essentially cut off from the reality of today when it comes to banking and finance. In other words, there is a very long arm of America that can beat you. Is there like a long enough arm of China that can protect you under the current circumstances?
Okay. And so far, if you look at Donald Trump's policy statements, it reveals a simple truth. As Henry Kissinger allegedly said, it's risky to be the enemy of the United States, but it's fatal to be ally of the United States. So you have the problem with Canada, with Denmark, with Greenland, and more will come with EU. I was amazed when yesterday I watched CNN. A guy asked Donald Trump, I think in Davos or somewhere, and it's an old story, but it's a replay. He said, could the Europe and United States work together on China, in the deal with China? He said, Europe is worse than China. It's a disaster. So I think more trouble will come for Europe. China is in a very comfortable position. Having said that, however, I understand, a country like Serbia, even Ukraine, which is much bigger in a way, from my theory of civilizational state, whether Ukraine, Kiev in more particular, or here, Serbia, both countries are on the, or belong to the interface between civilizations. So basically, the choice is either to become the bridge between civilizations or fortress with on one side against another civilization, which is the choice of Kiev. I think so. I agree 100% your thesis on the 4 pillars. You have to be friendly with everyone and keep neutrality. But in Deng Xiaoping's words, I don't know how to translate accurately, which means in my heart, I know everything. That's important.
Thank you very much. Well, and then since you said this about things related to the heart, there is a question that I have to ask you. I know it does relate to your heart. I know it relates to every Chinese heart, and it is to do with Taiwan. There is this grand recurring theme throughout the millennia of history of the reunification of China. China has gone through divisions and then reunification. So the difference between good emperors and bad emperors, between good governance and bad governance, was by and large whether a government was reuniting or dividing China at a given historical moment. So the reunification theme of today, translated in today's time, is manifestly about Taiwan. So we have a very conservative government in Taiwan that has very strongly opted, at least so far, against the strategic trend of unification. And we also have some very firm views emanating out of the mainland about reunification, and perhaps more, I'd say interestingly, about the time horizon for the reunification. So if the strategic patience is one of China's millennia-long virtues, is it fair to say that China's strategic patience with regard to Taiwan is coming to an end?
I see. Well, it's in a way not that complicated because People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. So at least we are being already patient enough for 75 years. That's not that short either, yeah. And now the conditions are more and more mature for reunification. So I think it's within reach. Militarily, we hope it will be achieved peacefully, but we are, as a cautious people, we are always militarily fully prepared, not vis-a-vis Taiwan's military force, which is not that important, but the American. But we told the Americans very clearly, we hope you will support China's peaceful reunification. If you do not support, then we will do our unification in peaceful means or less peaceful means. But this objective will be achieved, and it will come in sooner and sooner from my own way of thinking and my own analysis. And I think in the end, the people, in Henry Kissinger's words, from the two sides of Taiwan Straits, or the Chinese mainland people and people of Taiwan Island, eventually will have wisdom to find a peaceful solution. But this path could be slightly bumpy. We hope it will be as smooth as possible. But I told the Americans openly, I said, don't play fire with Taiwan. We're being very serious. And I said Chinese culture is what we call give face to others. We do not humiliate others in public. Yeah, so it's a face culture. It's very much Chinese culture. So we still show decent respect for United States. We call you a superpower. We describe you as the world's largest economy. I seldom say that, but our government states all the time, yes, the largest economy. Fine. So we show decent respect. But I said, if United States really want to have military conflict with China over Taiwan or over China, South China Sea, or on other occasions, hopefully that will never happen. Perhaps next day, the United States will no longer be a superpower in the eyes of the international community.
Well, it's a very, very clear message. A chilling one. You failed to cheer me up, I must admit. But I'm going to go on. I'm going to press on with questions. In your famous debate with Fukuyama, you debated democracy versus autocracy as a model of governance. So years have passed since this, and democracy is very much and a very fiercely, perhaps increasingly fiercely debated concept. So what's your view on democracy versus autocracy now, a decade after your Fukuyama debate?
Well, in the year 2011, when Arab Spring occurred, Fukuyama came to Shanghai, and we had a debate on the Chinese model. And he said, from his analysis, China may go through its own type of Arab Spring. And I said, no chance, and Arab Spring will become Arab Winter. Yeah. And then he said that China needs political reform. China has to adopt multi-party system and one person, one vote. Otherwise, your government will be not responsible for the people, but only for the leaders. I said, I agree with you. China and United States both need political reforms. But the United States needs more political reforms, and more urgently than China. We have studied the American political system. I think that system is a product of pre-industrial era. I made another forecast. I said, without substantial political reform, you are going to elect a leader worse off than George W. Bush. Yeah, in the end, true. Yeah. And then I made some other predictions. I said the Western political model will end up with very stupid, simple-minded populism. I made a lot of this kind of forecasts. In the end, I said it's not the end of history, but end of the end of history. I said it's openly, friendly, with a smile, face-to-face with him. And today, I think I'm more on the right side of history. No, the idea is, I said face-to-face with him. It's a thesis I advanced many, many years back before 2011. You cannot only use this so-called paradigm of political science, democracy versus autocracy, to understand today's world. Because what's democracy? Defined by West as a procedural democracy, huh? Universal suffrage and then multi-party system. This at best one form of democracy. It's called the democracy in form. What China focuses on, democracy in substance, or substantial democracy. So I said, rather than democracy versus autocracy. Why not? Good governance versus bad governance. And good governance can take the form of the Western model, but can also take the form of non-Western model, like the Chinese model. And bad governance can take the form of Western political model. As I've been to over 100 countries, I can give you 100 examples to illustrate this case. Western model, complete failure, that I give him some examples. So I said, then if we use the paradigm of good governance versus bad governance, good governance means substantial democracy, the purpose of democracy. If democracy is for the democracy, vote for the vote, from Chinese practical mind, it's mind-boggling. Why we need this kind of democracy? We need better quality of life, state governance, and other qualities. I'll give you an example. In the eyes of Chinese, it's laughable, you know. Of course, I have all the sympathy for the victims of the California, this forest fire, Los Angeles. It's in the most developed region of the United States. It's, or you make it the most developed part of the developed region of United States. Yet, this kind of damage, on the same day, almost same hour, an earthquake occurred in China's Tibet, in the high mountainous areas, 4,500 meters high above sea level. The Chinese military began to take action in 10 minutes because it's good governance. We use already automatic, what's a network of this earthquake designing system and the sensing system, and automatically the drones came to give the picture of the situation, and then helicopters moved immediate to the disaster zones. And by the evening, it's within 12 hours, electricity, everything restored. And within 24 hours, all the equipment, supplies were there, and people there. And so it's how do you say? In China, we say difference as big as the sky, which means you just imagine. It's in one of the most developed regions in the world. It's in one of the least known high mountain areas and villages. We can do this, perform this kind of 100 times better than what's happened in California.
So my last question before I let the audience ask questions to you is, I find it fascinating this shifting of the paradigm from the autocracy versus democracy to the good governance versus bad governance. And I can only agree that there are examples of bad governance in democracies. But there are also examples of bad governance in autocracies. So I'm puzzled, what's your view on, if you are faced with the case of bad governance in an autocracy, what do you do about it? Because in democracy, you go and vote for another person. And maybe that person proves to be worse, and then you vote for another person, right? Or for an old person to come back. But if you're inside an autocracy, and if you are unfortunate, unlike China, to be faced with bad governance, what do you do about it?
Of course, if we discuss this thesis, as you suggested, in abstract terms, we can have all kinds of possibilities. But in concrete terms, in the case of China, again, if we believe that truth can be established through comparative studies or in slightly relative terms, in that case, if you compare the Chinese model and the Western model, in abstract Western model, Chinese leadership, if you look at the top 7 members of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau, minimum requirement for most of them 3 terms as #1 of a Chinese province. Given the size of China, which means literally they've governed over 100 million people before they came to current position. It's by no means easy, which means almost 4 decades of good performance. So many eyes observe your performance through all these ways. And Xi Jinping has been governor in Fudan province, Zhejiang province, and Shanghai. So before he came to current position, he was already running an economy the size of India, and 100 million people and more. And then he was given another 5 years as vice president to get familiar with national affairs, and then become a leader. So with this kind of experience, the quality, obviously, Chinese current leadership is among the most competent in the world. Yeah. Sometimes I was joking I was in Paris with you and with others in the conference. I said, when the Chinese leaders look at EU's leadership today, are there any leaders or leadership or whatever? And look at their qualifications for that position, from defense minister to foreign minister to whatever. I'm sorry, so by Chinese criteria, it's way below the Chinese bar. Yeah. So again, it's in relative terms.
Okay, so I'm going to stop asking questions myself here, but I'm going to let the audience ask the questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question for the professor. So back in the audience, you need to have a mic. Please introduce yourself and make it a question,
All right.
please.
Short introduction, my name is George Ponos. I actually study in Beijing. I'm a student at Taiwan Question. I study international politics, and I'm curious, in keeping with the title of this Horizons discussion, The Year of the Snake, Harmony or Confrontation, what do you think will be the future development of Sino-South Korean relations in the aftermath of the failed self-coup in South Korea? The president has been more hostile to China and North Korea, and the opposition in South Korea has been viewed as more pro-China. So what do you think will happen? Thank you.
Well, South Korea is China's close neighbor. And I was there twice last year. And we were joking with our Korean friends. I said, in life, there were a few tragedies. In the United States, it's tax evasion. In China, it's drug dealing. It's capital sentence. In South Korea, it's to be president. And they said, wow, that's a very good summary. So I think South Korea is in the process of deep political trouble and chaos, has to sort out its own problems. Economically and politically, this current region goes too close to the United States, to Joe Biden. And when Donald Trump came to power, this region faced immediate crisis. And whether to change policy or not, then came all kinds of domestic and international pressure. So we just wait for South Korea to sort out its own problems. We are patient. We are ready to help in one way or another. But South Korea itself has to take initiatives to do a lot of things. I think you need to have a stable government. Then we can carry out normal state-to-state relations. Otherwise, it will be difficult. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Professor Cholosky.
张老师，晚上好。I would like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Jovan Chavoshki from the Institute of Recent History of Serbia. I'm a senior research fellow, but I did my PhD at Beijing Daxue at Peking University School of International Studies. For me, it was really interesting that this was the topic of today's lecture and discussion with you, because I know Chinese history very well. I'm a historian by vocation and training, and I know a lot about the Chinese esoterics and culture and everything else. And the Year of the Snake has always been a year which ushered in history-altering events. And I'm glad that this is a topic tonight, and for the audience today, I will mention only a couple of years which were snake years during the 20th century, which really changed world history. It was 1917, the Russian Revolution and America's entry into the First World War. 1929, the Great Economic Crisis. 1941, the entry of the Soviet Union and the United States into the Second World War. 1953, the death of Stalin and the end of the Korean War. 1989, the fall of communism. 2001, 9/11. 2013 to 14, the start of the Ukraine crisis. We are still living that, the aftermath of that crisis until today. So, based on your judgment, your knowledge, your expertise, what could be the history-altering event of this Year of the Snake? Thank you very much.
That's fascinating. I did not know. I did not know that there was like a succession of years of the snake. Phenomenal.
Your summary of events impressed me. I did not think in this way. You are thinking more in terms of this repeating of so many ups and downs. But on the whole, as a civilizational state, China has experienced so many ups and downs in its own history. China is not that, in many sense, a very secular country rather than a religious country. And as a result, if there any religion, that religion is history. So we think, history is our religion. We always say, consult our history, world history, to see where things go wrong, where we should not repeat past mistakes. So gradually, a nation has become more and more mature. And this morning, I had the fortune to had good discussion with your foreign minister. And I said, actually, when we arrived at foreign ministry, there were demonstrations just in front of the square. And I said, again, events of this nature happens. That I said, more important is to what extent that nation has become what I call reach the collective maturity. Collective maturity is very important. It cannot be just mature at the top leadership. It should also, at the level of intellectuals, at the level of even grassroots in many ways. And once this kind of collective maturity has reached, then I use a Marxist term, there will be a qualitative change. Yeah. From my study of Chinese model, we have reached this level of collective maturity. It's by no means easy. We have gone through so many ups and downs. But today's China's leadership, China's mainstream intellectuals, and China's young generation have reached certain maturity, whatever problem China has. But we're doing so much better than the United States. We know that. Yeah. And we'll find the right way. Of course, in the West, they try to say, no, you're terrible, you're in crisis. I said, we leave you in darkness. We don't care. Yeah. So with this kind of maturity, we can overcome whatever difficulties we have. Don't worry. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. It just came to me that you mentioned 1953 was the Year of the Snake. Well, the year 1953 was a historic altering in a way that an important hot war
there was essentially a Cold War fight between the proxies of the main protagonists of the Cold War, ended in 1953. So I wouldn't be shocked if 2025 brings about the end of a war, let's say in Ukraine. However, the aftermath of 1953 was the acceleration of the Cold War between the main protagonists. Sadly, less, of course, enthusiastic than about the war, the end of the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, I think the Year of the Snake might be the onset of a Cold War proper, 2.0 Cold War era between today's but in the globe. But I hope I may be wrong about it. But that reminds me, the 53 reminds me of this because of this comparison with the Cold War 1.0 vis-a-vis Cold War 2.0.
My memory could be right. The year 1953 was also the year of Khrushchev, the 20th Communist Party of Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Because it's also very important. When he began to criticize Joseph Stalin and this secret report, which had huge impact across the communist camp. And Deng Xiaoping was present at that particular conference. And he was given a briefing in the Chinese embassy about this report. And Deng said, well, you may have a point, but we cannot treat a leader this way. And then he said, later in China, when Chairman Mao died, he said, we can never treat Chairman Mao like they treat Stalin. He said the Chairman Mao was 70% right,
and 30%
wrong.
Wrong.
Because he understood very clearly the party made many mistakes. Chairman Mao made mistakes, but he also made very important contributions. So we need a balanced view. We must maintain the party's leadership. I come to my thesis of civilizational state, which is a holistic party. The West criticized Chinese Communist Party, say you have a one-party system. They did not understand China history. China has been governed by a one-party system since China was first unified in 221 BC by Emperor Qing. China has been always governed by what we call the unified ruling entity. Otherwise, the country disintegrated overnight. Even our ancestors knew this simple truth, because civilizational state is an amalgamation of hundreds of states into one over its long history. And the governance structure is always unified ruling entity. And this unified entity is buttressed, sustained by this selection system. You have meritocracy. You have to be competent, tested, before you can become prime minister. Yeah. So this is the basic logic. And now the Communist Party has, again, developed that system into today's system, which is working very well. And you also mentioned 1989. That's also very important, crucial year, because at that time, when Deng made this tough decision over Tiananmen, he was misunderstood by many people inside China, outside China. At that time, people thought Gorbachev was a hero. Deng Xiaoping was wrong. But in retrospect, most Chinese think Deng was right. Gorbachev was miserably wrong.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much for this very thoughtful answer. The one entity that's necessary for a civilization to stay together, and therefore a state to stay together if you happen to be a civilization state. Please, in the back, I see two hands. One in the very far, and then one near me.
Hello. I'm Alexandra. I'm very much thankful for your discussion, and I'm really grateful for the chance to hear it. My question is regarding how you mentioned China is interested in reform, and would you say that China would be interested in changing the United Nations Security Council, maybe adding the countries from the Global South, giving them permanent state, and the United Nations Security Council maybe right of veto? Because Russia has some ideas about it, maybe adding Brazil and other countries, and especially African countries, to actually giving them seats at the table and giving them a voice. Thank you very much.
And if it's about this United Nations reform, China is always very supportive, because within the UN system has all kinds of weaknesses. And on the other hand, we should be fair with the UN system, because I did my study in Geneva. It's a UN city. And UN has not only Security Council, on war and this kind of matters, UN not functioning particularly effective. Yet on many other things, from agriculture to disease control to many other things. So in social affairs, technological affairs, health affairs, and other things, refugee affairs, UN plays a very important role. Now, for the veto in the UN system, the UN system, this veto system, is part of the arrangement after defeating fascism in the Second World War. Both Russia and China made huge sacrifices. Russia, 30 million lives lost. China, 25 million lives lost. So this is a very important memory we should keep in mind. Furthermore, China said many, many times openly, the veto power China has is for the global south, for developing world. So if you look at the voting record, China's veto never deviates from that position. So that's important. Thank you.
If I may add, because I've been thinking about this for a while, and it's actually one of the most critical aspects of the reform of the Security Council, because it doesn't look good for the Security Council reform. Manifestly, it's the weakest point. I mean, you point to that and you say, well, this is obviously a thing of the ancient past. The UK and France as permanent members, and not India as like the world's most populous country. I mean, it just can't be defended. But in geopolitical recessions, there is no trust. And in order to get to the reform of the Security Council, the permanent members need to agree on how to reform it. They don't trust each other right now, so it's very unlikely that it could be reformed. I just read recently an article, exceptional article by Kishore Mahbubani, who gave an intellectually interesting proposal, is to say that this could be solved if the United Kingdom were to withdraw in favor of India, which would be a great closure, like a historical closure, now that India is like the largest democracy in the world, and the United Kingdom is no longer as, I'd say, central to the global order as it used to be in 1945, and that France can also withdraw from the permanent membership in favor of the European Union. And nobody's gonna argue against the EU taking a permanent seat in the Security Council, but it had to be at the leadership of France. I wouldn't bet too many dollars on that, so I think that it's much wiser to think about the reform of other aspects of the UN system rather than the Security Council under these current circumstances. And the very last question is going to go to the lady.
Good evening. First and foremost, thank you for this fruitful discussion. My name is Tara Tešić, and I'm coming from the Faculty of Political Science, University in Belgrade. My question would be, with the US announcing new tariffs on both EU and China, can we expect China to pivot more towards the EU as a key economic and strategic partner, or will Beijing seek alternative strategies to counterbalance these trade restrictions? Thank you.
You know, China's position on EU has been consistent for decades. That's something, again, very positive about civilizational state. A position firm, coherent, and consistent. We support European integration. We hope, Europe will become a pole in the multipolar world. But for so many years, especially during the past few years, what we see is the EU and Europe as a whole lost a lot of its independence and autonomy. Even we can use the term French President Macron used vassal to the United States. He was deeply worried about that. So what we have seen is with the coming to power of Donald Trump, if you look at the opening, the several statements by von der Leyen, by others, it began to show certain flexibility vis-à-vis China. But we are cautious, and we think it's in Europe's interest to have a better relations with China. Sometimes EU is a bit arrogant. For instance, when China and Serbia developing good relations, EU said, no, you should not do that. That's interference EU or European affairs. Very stupid. I think what we should do is Europe should have its degree of independence before we can really show decent respect for you. Chinese as a nation, we respect those who have guts, who can say, have courage to resist pressure and resist NATO. If you still want to be part of NATO, you become vassal to the NATO, we're less and less interested. I said to EU Brussels openly, I said, China moves like a bullet train. We don't wait for you. Thank you.
Thank you. This just gave me a thought that you might start strengthening your ties with Denmark, because Denmark seems to be very strongly minded with regard to its sovereignty and territorial integrity, which Serbia is also very mindful of. And by the way, we're exceptionally grateful for China's support for our policy of protecting our sovereignty and territorial integrity. You gave us much food for thought, and I'm exceptionally grateful for your time. I'm exceptionally grateful for everybody's time tonight. I invite you all to join us at the cocktail. We're going to stay around for a while, so you can continue your conversation with Professor Zhang, or less likely with me, if anybody cares. But thank you very much for joining, and welcome to the reception.